Welcome, everybody. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be speaking a bit about security and compliance at Datadog. I think one of the really interesting things I've seen Spangler and his team do is use an engineering first approach to security and compliance in a way that I really appreciate, having been on the other side. So with that, welcome to another episode of Datadog On. This is a series about engineering at Datadog. We go through real-world examples of the challenges faced by engineers at Datadog. And again, we have a URL there where you can go and sign up to be notified when more of these are coming out. So introductions first, of course. I'm Kirk Heiser. I'm a technical evangelist at Datadog, and I lead the evangelism team at Datadog. Andrew, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Andrew Spangler. I support the governance, risk, and compliance team at Datadog, and we sit within the information security and compliance organization.
Cool. So backing up a bit, a little bit of context about Datadog and what we are, where we're coming from. So Datadog is a monitoring and analytics platform that helps companies improve the observability of their infrastructure and applications. What does that mean? We help people build software more effectively. And we have a bit of scale to contend with. We have over 12,000 customers, millions of hosts, and trillions of data points per day. And internally, we run mostly on Kubernetes. The data point about Kubernetes is significant in that it gives you a bit of the operational overhead that we're dealing with, and a bit of the complexity. And in addition to Kubernetes and kind of the scale of numbers, we're also multi-cloud. And we have over 400 different integrations that are used to ship data to Datadog. So you kind of get an idea for the space of Datadog in general having to deal with complexity, and then especially for Andrew's case, trying to reason about risk in a place with so many dimensions for variables and to have to consider. And to throw another wrench in Andrew's job, one of the key components of how Datadog works is that there's this agent binary installed on every single one of our customers' production systems. I say every single one, that is a bit of an exaggeration, but every single one you need to collect metric data from, you're going to be installing an agent binary on. Adding another one, just for Andrew, is the fact that our customers send us some of their most critical software data, right? Like when they need to know when things are down, when systems break, they need to have the context and the right data presented for them to be able to reason about what is happening within their software system. And so our customers have an extremely high level of trust for us. And so Andrew certainly has his work cut out for him. And one of the core tenets of running a business like this, of having this level of trust, of having our binaries installed everywhere, it is earning and keeping the trust with our customers. And I think earning and keeping trust, in my mind, is one of the things that Andrew has balanced really well. So with that, Andrew, I'll let you chat a bit about what compliance means at Datadog.
Thanks, Kurt. So I thought to kind of set the stage, we might first give a little bit of background on how we've structured the information security and compliance team at Datadog, where we sit, and kind of give a sense to build on what you've talked about, give a sense of the scale over the last several years. So I was able to join Datadog right near the end of 2017 in November. At this point in time, Datadog was about 500 people, and the IT security and compliance teams was between 10 and 15. And so over the last 3.5 years, we've seen the total headcount of the company go from right there around 500 to over 2,000. We've also seen a dramatic expansion in our technology footprint. So 3.5 years ago, Datadog was solely hosted in AWS, and as Kirk mentioned, We're now multi-cloud, spread across all of the major cloud service providers, which has added some interesting nuance and additional complexity to the challenges that we face in protecting customer data and in building and earning that trust, and in building strong security programs. As we've as we've scaled across multiple data centers, the service that we offer has also continued to grow and evolve. Back in 2017, we kind of had this model of the 3 pillars of observability with infrastructure metrics, APM, and logs management. And while those are still very core tenets at Datadog, we've really evolved into a platform with multiple products, multiple types of data, multiple ways to enrich and present that data back to our customers. And so again, just kind of getting a sense of the scale of growth in both the infrastructure that supports the service, as well as the service itself. As those things have grown, as the companies continue to scale, so has our general function in security. We now have just under 100 folks across our corporate IT teams, our security engineering team, and then our infrastructure and information security and compliance group. In our compliance group specifically that I work in, we're north of 20 and looking to grow. So if you're here and interested, check out our careers page. Right now we're structured in kind of 2 primary pillars. So we've got the security engineering function. This contains teams that focus on things like offensive security, our active defense team. We have a security development group that includes folks who manage our security platform and a growing number of services that support both the infrastructure and the application teams. On our side of the house, information security and compliance, we've got a number of teams. We have a customer trust team. We'll talk a little bit about them here in a moment. Privacy function that continues to expand and evolve. Our team, GRC, are responsible for the governance, risk, and compliance functions at Datadog. And then as we've moved into some highly regulated markets, recognizing the need for dedicated expertise, we've built up a federal programs team to support Datadog's engagement with the government. And then a compliance operations team whose mission and mandate is to automate our compliance processes, to implement new technical capabilities, and then build tools that support our goals as a company. We also work really closely with our corporate IT and our IT security teams. One of the benefits of IT and security engineering and InfoSec and compliance all rolling up to our CISO is we get the opportunity to work kind of cross-functionally within those teams and try to all drive towards a common goal. So some of the guiding principles I wanted to talk about with our scale, and as we've continued to build out and think about how to evolve with Datadog, there's been maybe 3 things that have informed how we put these things into practice. So first, we're always conscious and mindful of risk and our goal of minimizing risk, understanding the context of that risk, and then being able to reduce and manage residual risk across the company. Our position in engineering, so we report up through the CTO, so our position in the engineering function at Datadog has really helped to facilitate partnerships with our engineering teams, which has been really key to the success of our work, and I'd like to think as well key to the success of Datadog in a way. So minimizing risk, preserving velocity. Datadog is a fast-moving company. We do lots of things very quickly, and that's been an important value at Datadog from an engineering perspective. This kind of brings an interesting wrinkle as a security and compliance person, because we're typically and maybe not unfairly often seen as a drag on velocity, or as something that will limit the ability to continue to move fast. So one of our values has been we want to be able to preserve that velocity, maybe functioning a little bit like airplane flaps, helping to generate lift at the right time, and then also helping to generate maybe a little bit of caution or slowdown where that's appropriate and important. And then the last guiding principle, so minimizing risk, preserving the velocity of our engineering teams and of the business as a whole, and then practicing empathy. Practicing empathy for our colleagues, recognizing their workload and their own goals as teams, understanding what the limitations are of the technology and of the resources that we have available, trying to really take a look at what's our current state, what's our aspirational state, and then how do we come together to set mutual goals to achieve those aspirations. We also look at practicing empathy for our customers, recognizing they're also thinking about security, that they're subject to their own compliance and regulatory requirements, and then in that lens, thinking about how we can establish trust and continue to build on the trust foundation and confidence in Datadog as a partner. So Kirk had the slides up, three kind of ways that I wanted to talk about how we've implemented those guiding principles. And the first here is thinking about security by design. So this is definitely a common theme across at least our little chunk of the industry. There's momentum for security to shift left in the build process and the development process and in business process. And so as we think about security by design at Datadog, what does that really look like and what does that mean? I think for us, it continues to evolve, and it's something that needs to be dynamic. But it really looks like as we think about our infrastructure, as we think about our processes, as our products and different business capabilities that we have, that those teams and those capabilities incorporate security and compliance as a fundamental component of the design, implementation, and operation of both our technology and our business processes. There's really been a natural expansion of that mandate as we've walked through the process of becoming a public company and then entered into some of these more highly regulated markets I mentioned earlier with federal government, thinking about FedRAMP, and then expanding our customer base and demonstrating that security by design through things like ISO 27001 and our SOC 2 report. Customer trust. So we talked again a little bit about the importance of earning and then maintaining the trust of our customers as we continue to expand the footprint of Datadog, as we look into these different regulated markets. We really have seen the need to evolve this into a dedicated team. So we've got an excellent team in the InfoSec and compliance group that is wholly focused on that customer trust aspect. They're really the public face of Datadog's security organization. They're involved in a number of things, everything from inbound customer audit requests to tight engagement with our legal and product teams during the due diligence phases of a contract negotiation. They'll also be responsible, or they also are responsible for the education and engagement of our customers. So Datadog uses a lot of modern or cutting edge novel technologies to take that risk-based approach to how we secure our customers' data, how we secure Datadog's data. And so being present to walk customers through, walk our colleagues through the different approaches that we've selected to controlling that security is a primary function for them. Another function of our team is really enabling the business. We talked about our kind of broad engagement across engineering. We also have many touch points in the G&A side of the house. We contribute, I think, directly towards the revenue efficiency of Datadog. How quickly can we turn those deals around? How can we anticipate what customers want to know about the security programs at Datadog so that they can build that trust? Unlocking new markets. I've talked a couple times about FedRAMP and opening up the government market. We also offer a number of products that are HIPAA compliant for the healthcare market. And then as we continue to look out across the different customer types that Datadog wants to pursue, many of them have associated regulatory requirements or just security requirements in general that directly with our groups to make sure that we can meet those needs. I think, again, focusing back towards the engineering side, how can we enable the business? How can we enable the engineering function within the business to continue to move forward and to accomplish the product goals that they have, the reliability and resilience goals that we have? Some of the things that we've taken into consideration here and are actively evolving is this concept of self-service compliance or self-service deployment guidance for new products that are rolling out, new data centers, new infrastructure. This has been, I think, one of the key points that we've identified as critical to our ability to continue to scale across multiple clouds, moving into new countries. We're, as we mentioned earlier, a growing team and really relatively a large team for a security and compliance group. But even with that, right, we can't keep up with everything. And so how do we make sure that our colleagues have the resources they need so that we're not a single point of failure or a bottleneck in that deployment process? Another thing that we focused on is being able to plug into some of our existing engineering workflows. Talked a little bit earlier about the security engineering function and the partnership that we have with them. This has also been one of the impetus for our compliance operations team. So recognizing as Datadog scales, as we add new customers, new data centers, we need more robots to do the work. There's plenty of compliance that I think traditionally has been done manually. We're certainly no strangers to spreadsheets, but we also want to take advantage of the modern tooling and the automation capabilities that are present, and then where it's appropriate and possible to build some new tools to operate at Datadog scale.
Yes, 100%. I think one of my own personal experiences with change management has been the idea of somebody who has, no experience, no domain specific knowledge for what I'm shipping, that doesn't know what I'm shipping, but is in the way of me deploying my software, and it's a checkbox and they're not going to look at anything. And so I think one of the things that's really exciting about the engineering based approach to compliance for me is that all of this stuff happens, and it happens in a way that's more effective than kind of the manual looking and signing off. And so I think this is one of those cases where the automation is giving us a better product with a better outcome. So all around, yes, 100% on board for this. So let's talk a bit about the experience with corporate laptops. I think for me personally, having been a startup employee and having been a employee at a medical device company, I've experienced both sides of the corporate laptop. From prior experience, when you're at a startup, provisioning and getting a new laptop tends to be, maybe you're using your own laptop. Maybe you're not even given a company specific laptop. And whatever laptop you're given, you tend to have admin rights. And there is kind of that hybrid approach of, well, a company's given me a laptop, I'm going to play my games on it, and I'm going to set it up as if it was a personal laptop. I'm curious kind of your perspective on when it matters for a company. When does it begin mattering how you view your computational inventory from your perspective?
That's a great question. I think there are probably a couple different inflection points on when you start to see the, the cultural mentality shift with things like laptops. One is Datadog's very responsive to customers, and as we've engaged with an increasing number of enterprise customers, their expectations are that our security process and our footprint looks similar to theirs. They have put things in place to protect data that they're responsible for. And the expectation is that Datadog sitting downstream, to your point earlier, processing some of their more sensitive data, that we're taking similar precautions. So I think as a company begins to really engage with enterprise customers, that's definitely a piece. I think as we set our own internal security objectives, we have different benchmarks that we want to hit, while at the same time supporting people in using the tools and the software and the capabilities that they're used to, that they're comfortable with, familiar with, that helps them be most efficient. And so I think you have to identify when that makes sense for you. I think there's also that external driver of customer expectations. And then, again, since we're talking about compliance, I'll continue to come back to that. I think as we've made these commitments as a business to engage and serve these highly regulated markets, there are then, in some cases, laws that require you to put some of these restrictions in place. And so really, we viewed this, at least in part, as an opportunity for us to help guide and shape organizational change management at Datadog, and make that happen in a way that preserves the cultural values that makes Datadog, I think, a really great place for engineers, but also then meet those expectations and kind of balance that line between internal risk and customer expectations.
Gotcha. So I think there's an interesting thing that has occurred here, right? As we've grown, we've also needed to target multiple operating systems. Can you chat a bit about growing beyond the MacBook for everybody to something else?
Yeah, so like a lot of I think startups these days, Datadog started out with everybody gets a MacBook, and that simplifies to an extent, simplifies the management process for fleet management. As we've grown, there have been folks who come in and say, "Hey, I'm really good and most familiar with Windows, and I really would most benefit from a Windows laptop." We now have, and I think for a while, have had folks who have said, "Hey, I'm really good with, and my job would be most efficient with access to a Linux workstation." And so those each bring some nuance and complexity and add some overhead, certainly mostly for our IT team, but also for our compliance function as we think about providing guidance on how do we establish common security baselines across these sort of disparate operating systems. And then how do we find that tension between, things like everybody gets local admin to, hey, now we're going to need to rethink or revisit what makes the most sense. And so being able to put in place sort of logical restrictions based on security concerns, again, both for our customers and for our regulatory requirements.
Yeah, and I think it's a good spot to pause you there in talking about what level of restrictions you put on a laptop, because I very distinctly remember the next product we'll talk about rolling out, which I might as well introduce it. Actually, let's skip ahead. Jamf. I distinctly remember our CTO pushing back on some of the data points that we were originally going to collect. And I think that this was unique from two perspectives, from two dimensions from my perspective. So the first is that this is happening in public. Having worked at a medical device company, this was very much not a piece of software that there would be a public discussion about. It is something that would be hidden away from you that you wouldn't want to be probing for. And then the other thing was that we were talking about collecting less data. And I think like with a tool like this and the general established perspective, you're going to say, collect more, we'll figure out what we don't need later, and we'll be more covered in general. So maybe we can chat a bit about what we're referring to here and how this was rolled out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to your point, Kirk, one of the great things about the way that we're able to practice security and really engineering across the board at Datadog is that it is transparent, that we do a lot of these things in public, that we really value conversation and feedback. And again, back to that idea of organizational change management, where if we're going to make these changes and retain people and continue to preserve velocity and practice empathy, that we need buy-in. We need people to agree with the things that we're putting into place and how we want to move the company forward together. And so, with things like Jamf, we've also implemented CIS benchmarks across our workstation fleet. These are baseline standards, security configuration standards, very common in the industry. They're open source. So as our corporate IT team begins to make some of these changes in how we look at and manage the workstation fleet, those conversations happen, again, like you said, publicly in GitHub RFCs or really big Slack channels, and there's an opportunity for a push and pull there, and lots of different considerations, right? We've got a highly distributed workforce. Again, we have those customer expectations. We have our own internal security and management objectives as we try to think about how to go from 500 to 2,000 plus to the future.
Okay, I think that's a good spot. Sorry to interrupt you. To go back to the other slide that I skipped over and talk a bit about Beyond Corp. To just interject there.
Yeah. So Beyond Corp again is another strategy for managing a highly distributed and sort of a modern IT environment. We've, in particular, our excellent IT team has really put a lot of work into implementing some of these strategies beyond Corp, thinking about honest security from an endpoint managing perspective. And so these are things like host monitoring and configuration management, transparency through that RFC process and brown bags, and then as maybe deviations from our target baseline, whether that's software or some configuration or maybe just a version behind, as those things are picked up by the fleet management system, that there's a kind of an unobtrusive but still persistent notification. So something like Slack notification for a software update, or almost a push notification in your workstation. Another interesting example, I think, in this kind of same thread is browser extensions. These are
the worst. I mean, the best.
Yes, both at the same time. Really interesting and kind of unique attack surface for a company. I think there's some excellent tools, and also an interesting problem for IT and security and compliance teams to try to figure out how and support folks using those tools that they want, but then also recognizing those kind of trust dynamics that we talked about earlier. So actually, just this last quarter, our IT security team has pushed out some new tooling that will give them the ability to enumerate Chrome extensions. We run some tests and some scans on those Chrome extensions to get an understanding of the risk baseline of the security dynamics of those browser extensions, and then send people a Slack message if they're using something that's risky, and then eventually having that ability to maybe remove or prohibit that if it presents a risk to the business.
Wow, that sounds really cool. I can think of a few products, namely ones that help you write better, that are keyloggers ostensibly, and so I can imagine there are products which seem to be great that from a regulatory standpoint for an enterprise laptop are terrifying, and I'm really now curious about how this works, checking the browser extensions, but we will save that for afterwards. All right.
There's an RFC up in GitHub.
Oh, perfect. So I can go read about it. All right. So let's talk about automated enforcement. And I think this to me is one of the more magical products from a compliance perspective that I've interacted with or experienced. So why don't we talk a bit about what this is and what this means?
Yeah. So back to maybe one of our earlier points about the value of the partnership with our engineering teams, in particular our security engineering teams, who write and maintain a lot of tooling for visibility and observability across our production environments, our various pre-prod environments. One of the tools that they've put together is this concept of automated enforcement. So maybe a quick example of one of the ways that we've used that as a compliance team is with the integrations into, let's say, AWS, being able to go out and look at security group configuration. And we want to have a sort of an explicit allow, default, deny policy on security groups. We want to have visibility into what ports are open, which resources are being allowed to communicate across the network. And so the tooling that they've developed will not only alert if a port or a given service is allowed through that's not sort of explicitly allowed. If there's a configuration change that's made, it also has the ability to revert that change, notify the engineer, hey, you made a change that's kind of against our standard patterns. If you need this change, here's who to reach out to, and here's how to kind of walk through the process of making that change. And we use a lot of tools like this where at least historically in my sysadmin days, you'd output a long list of firewall rules and configurations, and you kind of have to go through and manually review these cumbersome documents. And so being able to shift that responsibility, at least mostly, to automation has been a huge benefit, I think, for certainly the security function, but also for us over here in compliance.
Yeah, I think on the flip side of that, as a developer shipping things and not being aware of the things where we're allowed to do and not allowed to do, or that are okay from a security perspective and definitely not okay from a security perspective, I think having that automation in place to tell you, hey, did you mean to do this? Because you just did this. One of the things that we have now is, there's script for automatic system management, things like Terraform, and potentially you're applying a script to a piece of infrastructure and you're not, as a developer, potentially aware of all of the pieces of infrastructure being created. So to me, that is like another layer of security as a developer for helping you ship things confidently and knowing, okay, I'm not going to be doing something that is terrible because I will immediately get notified and it will get shut down right away. So let's talk about one of these tools that you mentioned a bit earlier. One of the things that we said at the beginning is Datadog runs on Kubernetes. Kubernetes means this thing called containers. Can you tell me a bit about how you verify containers, or how do you even reason about containers in security space?
Yeah, so I think this is another great example of how Datadog as a company and how the compliance function has really evolved and continues to evolve. We have work that was done last year that will, I think, continue into the future with, in particular, the compliance operations team. One of our senior folks, who's actually now the team lead for compliance ops, had the opportunity to embed with our build engineering team for a number of months last year. Build engineering does a ton of really great stuff. One of the really interesting things that they've been working on is modernizing and tailoring the deployment process for infrastructure and code at Datadog. And so, back to that idea of how do we shift security and compliance left? What better place to start and to work with than the folks who are helping us build and deploy software? And so we had Bill embed with the build team last year, and it was an opportunity for us to not only build relationships and cultivate a kind of two-way trust with a really core team at Datadog, but also then build in some capabilities and define a roadmap for what the future of compliance evidence and security controls could look like at Datadog. So you've got represented here Trivy as a sort of just-in-time vulnerability scan for deployments that are moving through our software delivery machine. This also gives us the ability to kind of tap into the main line of code and changes and compliance requirements as they flow through this machine. And so thinking about how we can define policy as code, leveraging things like the open policy agent and some of the capabilities with containers and microservices, and being able to standardize around our security controls in that multi-cloud environment.
For sure. I think it has a lot of parallels to the infrastructure being automated, to containers and upstream dependencies automatically being flagged as potentially problematic. Another thing that we talked about before is the idea of GitHub code owners. Can you chat a bit about what this means in general?
Yeah, so this was an interesting lesson that we learned going through the IPO process. So one of the things that you pick up as a public company is requirements to adhere to a law called Sarbanes-Oxley. And without getting into too much kind of wonk detail about SOX, there's a number of requirements that public companies have to have around their IT systems that guarantee or that validate your security around financial systems. So how do you meter customer data or customer usage? How do you turn those the data into dollars, basically? And so one of the particularly I think challenging controls is for specific changes to these regulated systems, you have to implement some additional change management controls. So Datadog's code workflow generally encourages or requires 2 people to approve a change before it is pushed into our production environment. SOX adds another kind of nuance on top of that, where the person pushing the change to a financial system that's in scope for these SOX requirements has to be qualified to approve that change. It needs to be an owner of that system. It needs to be someone with kind of the authority and accountability to validate that changes being made to these systems are approved and expected and meet all these criteria. And so again, going back to the Datadog scale and the emphasis on velocity, we landed on building out some functionality around code owners. So being able to take that code owners file in GitHub and define some workflows around identifying who are the authorized persons who can approve these changes to our revenue systems, and then how can we generate compliance artifacts in a programmatic way have that audit trail, have any deviations reported, allow us to go and do some remedial work if necessary. And again, this was really the result of a close partnership with our engineering teams, with our revenue engineering team, and some really great work by the folks in GRC.
Yep, great. All right, now for the hot topic for sure, supply chain security. I will turn it over to you, and you can talk a bit about one of the in-house built systems at Datadog. Maybe explain the space a bit at a high level.
Yeah, so you mentioned at the beginning of our talk here, Kirk, that we have over 400 different integrations that folks are installing the Datadog binary, the open source agents on their systems. And so as we think about how to build a compromise resilient system, one of the really interesting pieces of work that's been done by a number of folks and internally led by one of our staff engineers has been the implementation of TUF, the update framework, and in Toto, which has allowed us to gain a high level of confidence about the authenticity and the integrity of agent integrations from the moment that our developers commit source code to the point that our end users install them as packages. And without going into too much detail, I'd definitely encourage folks to check out this blog post by Trishank. Really interesting read. He's also got a couple of I think video talks that dig a little bit deeper, but really neat capability that allows us as compliance folks to represent the security capabilities that are built in natively to our development process.
All right, so kind of flipping it around, right? We introduced kind of a tool that we use to verify that the software we built is the software that ends up on people's machines. Let's talk a bit about how Datadog evaluates vendors and downstream vendor risk. What does that even look like? How do you evaluate risk in general from a external vendor standpoint?
I think that's the question of the hour, especially after the last several months. I think have shown a new spotlight on the importance of supply chain risk and supply chain management, and how we think about vendors and sending data downstream to other folks. And so this process continues to evolve at Datadog. It's really grown organically. Talked a little bit about how over the last 3.5 years we've added north of 1,500 people. Each of them again has their own tools, their own vendors, their own sort of preferred way of doing things that ultimately help make Datadog a better place for everybody. But we recognize the responsibility of protecting Datadog's corporate data, information that we kind of generate and maintain internally, but then also more and more things like privacy data and personal information and our customers' data that's used for enrichment or as a sub processor. So we try to think about this in a couple different ways. One, we want to be proactive and risk-based. We want to understand the context of what specific data is being sent to a vendor. What does that sort of data flow look like? And how can we be predictive about some of the potential risk with these vendors? We also want to be responsive. So things like SolarWinds breach, like shell shock and heartbleed, being able to quickly respond and validate the security capabilities of our vendors, moving more and more towards automation and trying to remove the manual work there. And then sort of as a part of normal operations, walking through a regular, at least annual assessment of these vendors. So building relationships with some of our key vendors, understanding what their infrastructure and kind of security space looks like, and then building this assessment process into our own workflows, both from an engineering and a business side. So integration with procurement and our legal colleagues focused on that security of data flowing downstream.
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging parts of your job as an outsider is trying to figure out all of the things you haven't thought about yet and trying to think about all of the mental gaps that you have. I think that is probably one of the most challenging things to do in general. So this was great. Thank you so much for sharing this, Andrew. For everybody on the call, thank you so much. We're going to turn it over to questions now. So there's already a few questions. And again, if you want to kind of join this challenge of reasoning about all the things you're not thinking about and building out these automated systems to both enhance developer impact internally and externally, Datadog is hiring. Let's start with one of the questions. I think we got a couple really good ones. First of all, Andrew, what kind of changes did you have to do to work with the United States government?
Where to begin? So Datadog last year received an ATO, an authorization to operate from FedRAMP, and so FedRAMP, if you're not familiar, is both an organization and a compliance framework published by the U.S. government, specifically for cloud companies. And so there's three different, and again, I'm speaking simply here, but there are three different tiers to FedRAMP: low, moderate, and high. And so as you walk through those processes or the gap analysis of where are we at now, where do we need to be in order to do this business with the government, there's lots of small changes. I think one of the benefits for Datadog is the security programs that we've built are not based around checkbox compliance. So we've tried to take a look across the industry from the experience that the folks in our department have had, and set a high bar for our security programs that then allow us to kind of map some of these compliance frameworks back to the things that we already do, and then certainly closing gaps where they exist. So some changes necessary, I think, specifically in terms of access management and how we monitor and log access to certain systems, doing that in a way that kind of lines up with federal expectations has been an interesting shift.
Yeah, I think as an outsider, one of the things that I've noticed is that the access to information about the status of the systems is more limited than the greater systems in general. So it tends to be that the people working on the system know about the system and inhabit the system, and it's a little bit less clear from people outside of working in that environment what's going on. Okay, so we got two more pretty great questions. I'm going to start with the one that came in first. So does Datadog have international employees? If so, how does this impact the availability this employee has to systems and data? And what tools do you use to facilitate these controls?
That's an excellent question. So to answer the first part of that question, absolutely, Datadog has many international employees. We have an engineering hub in Paris. We've got another office in Dublin. We've got growing presence in APAC. So truly a global company with a global workforce. We use a variety of tools. I think one of the maybe more interesting tools for this conversation is a tool called AppGate. AppGate is a software-defined perimeter, kind of it's a little bit of a disservice, but think of it as maybe a modern-day VPN that allows you to granularly provision access for folks to just the resources they need. So instead of like a VPN kind of dumping you off into a subnet where you have access to any system sitting in that network. AppGate gives you the ability to say, hey, Andrew can interact with one or two of these systems in this network, and that's it. And yes, the name of the tool is AppGate.
Yep, AppGate, it's super cool. Access to what you need and can't even see what you don't. So the ultimate, again, going back to enhancing developer productivity, the person who's responsible for shipping things. If I don't need to see it, great. Don't make me look at it and see what it is and try to remember what it is and try to remember that I shouldn't be trying to touch that thing. So again, a more proactive background task that enhances productivity for developers. Okay. So another question, it's important to hire security engineers to scale security capabilities, to build tools, reproduce reported vulnerabilities, and fix them rather than relying on engineers who are focused on building features and fixing bugs. But how do you ensure security doesn't get siloed within the security team in general?
Man, what a great question. I think this is a challenge for many organizations, and not a stranger at Datadog either. I think maybe two things that I'd call out as beneficial that we've seen some return from in avoiding silos and breaking down silos from a security perspective. The first is, as Kirk mentioned earlier, that concept of transparency and having these conversations out in the open. This gives, I think, people who are not focused on security for their full-time job the opportunity to get some insight into what the security and compliance teams are focused on, what tools are being built, what new processes are being designed and developed. And so I think that idea of transparency and trying to do things out in the open configuration, to an extent, right? There's some things that by necessity need to remain least privilege. But in general, I think having those conversations out in the open has been really beneficial. I think another thing that has been really valuable, both on the security engineering side as well as InfoSec and compliance, is this concept of partnership and embedding. So I talked about how one of our folks had spent some time truly embedded with our build engineering team, attending the stand-ups, going in their Slack channels. He had work assigned on their Jira board. He was truly, integrated into that group, and the kind of visibility of both teams' work, I think, was elevated through that process. And so, avoiding these silos is I think there's really no end state. It's something that you have to consciously think about and fight against as a security team. And I think those are two ways that we found some success doing that.
I can add another anecdote. Having not been on the security team, there's a couple things that I think the security team has done well. We first of all, we have an informal space to talk about security and an informal Slack channel to talk about security, so we can talk about what's going on in the industry. I think regardless of what your role is, security matters to you, right? For every engineer, you have to care about security. It's part of being online in general, right? It's thinking through the implications, what could go wrong, what am I not thinking about? The other thing that was really a different mindset for me, coming from a medical device company background, is when I joined, and I joined as a remote employee, one of the things a leader at the company told me was to separate my work networking from my personal networking, and to keep a completely separate network for my work laptop versus my personal in-home network. And so I think the idea of having transparency, again, to reinforce Andrew's point of, look, we're not here to gather data to have a file should we need to take some action, and genuinely saying, look, we don't want to have this data anywhere near us. Keep it on your own separate network and you're good. And so I think that approach in general of having an informal space to discuss, where you don't have to be an expert and you can come and ask questions about security events that happen externally, and also being proactive and being a genuine ally outside of the specific security framework. Okay, so it looks like one more question came through. I like the idea of making everyone responsible for his or her own security compliance with Slack alerts, etc. How do you know where to draw the line between employee lead compliance and forced compliance, i.e. push software and forced updates? So I have personally seen forced updates, so I will let you answer this.
It is a thing. I think maybe the simplest answer to that is where there are regulatory requirements, that becomes sort of the minimum baseline or the minimum bar for, hey, these things have to be done. To Kirk's point, this idea of democratizing and sort of distributing the security awareness and security responsibility to our teams has been really a great way to facilitate a security conscious culture. But at the same time, there are still some things that have to be black or white, right? We have to have these vuln scans done. We have to have these change management requirements. We have to have these types of access control things in place. And so where that line is drawn kind of has to be a bright line at meeting those compliance requirements. I think one of the benefits or one of the values that our team brings is being able to interpret those in the Datadog context. And so again, back to that bright line, there's also some ability to use technology to help clarify what that looks like at a company like Datadog.
Agreed. And I have never felt that it was too heavy-handed as a personal anecdote in general. All right, so I don't see, oh wait, there's one more question. Let's see, this will be the last one potentially. And again, I think somebody asked earlier if this is recorded. Yes, it's recorded. It will be available on the Datadog on YouTube channel. All right, while using Terraform, what is a good Datadog tool to monitor my infrastructure? I assume the infrastructure tab within Datadog would put me on the right path. So yeah, I can probably take this one. So using Terraform, Datadog has a very robust, from my perspective, integration with AWS. And so there are multiple ways for you to ingest data from AWS. Number one is what we talked about before, kind of having that agent installed on each one of your systems. So potentially each one of your EC2 instances, et cetera. Or you can have a container within your Kubernetes cluster. It's scheduled as a daemon set, which means it runs the container once per node and sends up all that information. But the other thing you can do, and that is super powerful, is there is an AWS integration specifically. So rather than installing a binary, we get metrics out of AWS. And so as soon as you start creating anything, yes, it will start populating within the infrastructure tab within Datadog. And so there is a bit of latency. It's a couple minutes, hypothetically, of you enable the integration, and then we start ingesting data. And so, yes, the infrastructure tab will start you down. Okay, we got one last one. We'll see if we can squeeze it in. All right, but yes, you'll be able to see it in the infrastructure tab using the AWS integration. Again, it will show you up. So hopefully that answered. Last question, is there a quick and easy way for Datadog to log and alert potential OWASP top 10 related requests to your application? Any response there, Andrew?
So I would say on this one, last year, Datadog announced a new security monitoring product. And I know that there are configurations that you could put into place for things like the OWASP top 10. This would be a great question to reach out to our support team and get some insight into the best way to configure that. But if it's not something that can be done now, I'd keep an eye on the roadmap. That's a great idea.
Yep. Cool. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Thank you for sticking through with us. Yes, thank you. Glad to have you here. Glad to have spent the time together. And again, thank you to Andrew for sharing all of this great insight. And this will be available on YouTube. Any more questions, reach out, like Andrew said, to support, and they can route it for you. Bye, everyone. Have a great one. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. Cheers.